In this video I'm going to be looking at deck building for the solo version of the Mythos CCG. I won't be looking at the game rules in too much detail, but I will be going through the deck building process, and to do this I will be using the cards that come in the standard game set, which is the basic 2-player starter for the game. In the solo game you are trying to complete the adventures from your deck while retaining as much of your sanity as possible, and your final sanity score acts as an indicator of how well you've done through the game. You use a Mythos deck which has the monsters and events removed, and they go into a separate threat deck which attacks you throughout the course of the game. The other rules generally remain the same. When you are building your Mythos deck for the solo game, you've got to have between 10 and 30 points worth of adventure cards, and this determines how many of each other type of card have got to be included in your deck. So when you're just using the standard game set, you've obviously got quite a limited card pool, and that will impact these decisions. Obviously, as your collection grows, you can include more things and have bigger games. If we look at the adventure cards that are available now, I can technically go up to 14 points before the rules ask me to include cards that I don't have in the standard game set in terms of the quantity. So for this example, I'm just going to stick with the 2 5-point adventures, which are Questionable Judgment and 2 Cities and a Tale. You can see on the cards they have in capitals the key elements, the key cards that you need to have in your deck and play in order to meet the requirements and complete them. So the next step is to take a look at the locations and see what we've got that meets the needs of these cards. So the rules of the game say that I've got to have the same number of locations as points of adventures, and all locations have got to be different, and I can only have 1 sanitarium for every full 10 adventure points. Looking at the requirements for 2 Cities and a Tale, I need a Kingsport location and a New York location. For Questionable Judgment, I need a library, and I need gate locations in different cities. So these are the things that I'll be considering, at least in part, when it comes to putting the locations in my deck. There are only 2 library locations available to me, one in Vermont and one in Providence, so I'm just going to put those 2 straight in my deck. The rest of the Vermont and Providence locations I'm probably going to ignore because of the requirements of my other adventure being mostly around New York and Kingsport. Likewise, I've got no real need to go to Arkham, and I certainly don't want to go to any exotic locations for these adventures, so I'll get rid of those as well. If I look at the New York sites, I've got 2 that have gates at their locations indicated by the swirl in the top left corner. I'll put those in. I've also got a sanitarium there, so I'll put that in, as I'll probably need one of those. The 4th location can just go in anywhere, I think, because that will be a good place for me to either meet characters or to get tome cards. That's the bookshop. So looking at the Kingsport locations now, I've got 7 available to me. I only need to put 4 in my deck, so I'll get rid of 3 of them. One of them will be the gate location in the country, as that doesn't match the requirements for my adventures. And then I think I'll get rid of 2 of the other gate locations. I don't really want the 4 cards in there all giving me sanity loss. So I will keep 1 which allows me to find tomes at it, and 1 that allows me to find artifacts at it. So that leaves me with 4 New York locations, 4 Kingsport locations, the 2 libraries, and a good mixture of gate locations in cities. And I think that's basically all I really need for this deck. So we'll leave it with that and move on to the next. These are the allies that come in the starter set. The solo rules say that I need to have 3 allies for every full 5 points of adventures in my deck, so I need to include 6 of them. The first thing I will do is look at what my adventures require. So if I look at 2 cities and a tale, I can see that I need Sonia Lovecraft and I need an author. So I'm immediately going to include Sonia Lovecraft. The authors, well, I've got 2 available. I've got Howard Lovecraft and Belknap Long, so they will definitely go in my deck. They're all New York characters, so they can all be met at a lot of my locations. The next thing I need to look at is questionable judgment. Now, the only real ally requirement there is that I need a corrupt cultist. I've got 1 corrupt cultist that's available at Kingsport, the Terrible Old Man, so that one can go straight in my deck as well. As I'm looking at Kingsport locations or allies, I've also got Granny Orne available, and she comes with a sanity bonus, so she's definitely going in my deck. A lot of the other characters are available at Arkham or Providence or Vermont, so I'll immediately ignore those as I won't really get much chance to play them. So with 1 slot left to fill, I'm looking at either Squire Sawyer Whately, who can be met at any country location, or Samuel Windsor, who can be met at any non-gate location. A lot of my locations are cities, and also Samuel Windsor comes with an ability that allows me to remove phobias that affect my investigator. So I think I'll definitely go for him, and that is my 6 allies selected. With that done, I'm now going to be looking at the artefacts that are available to choose from. Now, a lot of these will have effects that are very dependent on what an opponent is playing in a 2-player game, or they'll need certain monsters or other cards already in your deck. So what I'm going to really be looking for here, I think, is things that just help the value of my allies, or which help my sanity. And there's 2 obvious choices: the cast iron skillet, which gives me +1 to my sanity, and also you can give it to another ally when the ally who's having it has to be discarded. Then there's the 32 revolver, which gives a +2 to an ally's value, and again gives you a +1 sanity, so I think that's quite good. The bolt action rifle is another option that gives quite a powerful +3, but I don't think I'm going to be too likely needing that given the monsters that I will later be using. So with that in mind, it's the cast iron skillet and the revolver that I will pick for my deck. Similar to artifacts, the rules require you to have 1 tome for every 5 points and 1 spell for every 5 points of adventures. With the tomes, you get 3 in the starter set. 1 of them can only be played if you've got characters or a character who can read glyphs, so I don't think there's any point in having that in my deck given everyone speaks English, and I think I've only got 1 ally who can speak glyphs or read glyphs, so we can get rid of that one. That leaves the Letter from a Friend and the Revelations of Glarkey as my 2 tome cards for my deck. Every tome card has got a symbol or symbols on it on the lower left part of the card, which shows which spells can be found within it. So I need to match the spells to those symbols. I will have the Blasphemous Obeisance, I think that is, which is the only spell in the set that can go with the Letter from a Friend. I've got a choice for the other tome, but it doesn't really make a lot of difference. When you're playing solo, a lot of these spells, they affect your opponent's allies or creatures in your opponent's threat, so it doesn't particularly matter what you pick. So I'll pick Petrify as my other spell. So those are the 2 that will now go into my deck. The final thing I need to do to build my Mythos deck is to look for any other requirements in my adventure cards which hasn't been covered by the rest of the process. So in 2 Cities and a Tale, it says I need to take a train to the New York location. So I would take a train card, the event, and put that in my deck. And both of my adventures require 1 monster, to be matched to them, so I will just take an insect from Shagai and that will go into my deck. Now when I take a monster into my deck, I have to put an equivalent monster into the threat deck, and I will cover that in just a moment when I look at the threat deck in some detail. So now we come to assembling the threat deck, which consists of two parts, the monsters and the events. So looking at the monsters, the rules for that say you've got to have a number of monsters where their point value totals 2 times your adventure points and whose total number of cards is equal to or less than the number of adventure points, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically like saying if I've got 10 points of adventures, I've got to have 20 points of monsters and at least, no more than 10 cards. So looking at the monsters that come with the set, I've got to have the insect from Shagai first of all, because I've put one of those in my deck, so that one's going in. And then it's really just a case of picking up 20 points worth of monsters in 10 cards or less. So I think I'll basically look at what I like and put it in. So I'm going to have the 2 Haunting Horrors, 2 Mygos, Dark Young, and the Servant of Glaaki. Oh, and that leaves me with 4 points, so the Martin's Beach Monster. So that's basically as simple as it is. You can pick the monster cards, whatever you fancy, and put them in your deck. The only other thing you need to do is make sure that for every full 10 points, you've got to include a Great Old One or an Outer God, and there is one of these in the starter set, so that is the one that I will be including. Events are pretty straightforward. You basically take all the cards that could affect your investigator in a negative way, shuffle them together, and then add into the threat deck 3 of them for every full 5 points of adventures. So in this case, I would take all of the events in the top part of the screen, which are fanned out, and shuffle them up and put 6 of them in my deck. It's simple as that. Obviously, this will get a bit more complicated when you have a larger collection of cards, so you either just reduce it how you want, or there's plenty of scope there for creating a bit of a theme around the events that will affect your investigator instead of making it totally random. Obviously, the events such as trains and cars and even ambushes, which rely on your opponent's cards, they won't be included in the events that go in. The final thing you need to do is include 1 day card and 1 night card for every 10 points of adventures. There were 4 in total in the starter set, so you can just pick one of each, and I tend to pick the one that has the potential for the worst effect on my investigator. So that's basically it. You've created your Mythos deck, you've created your threat deck, so you're all set for a game of solo Mythos. In my next video, I'll do a playthrough taking my investigator through this deck and just see how that plays out, and I'll give my thoughts on how the system plays as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.